Let's call the meeting to order, July 9th, 2024. Can we have the roll?
Councilmember Evans?
Present.
Councilmember Edwards?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Randolph?
Here.
Mayor Millman?
Here.
Councilmember Best-Campbell?
Present.
Councilmember Arndt?
Here.
And Councilmember Taylor.
Present.
Everybody present accounted for. Let's stand for the flag salute, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I move to accept the agenda in order and content.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. And no special presentations. Public comments. Do we have anybody sign up for public comments? While we're doing that, we received 7 written public comments that were emailed to council members on a couple of different topics. Please reference those on your own time. First up, when I call your name, come to the podium, state your name and whether you live in the city limits, and you'll have 3 minutes. First is Jeffrey Lyon.
Hi, good evening. I'm Jeff Lyon. I'm a resident of the city of Woodinville. I'm speaking today to oppose any form of government-owned or operated surveillance. But before I go into that, I want to tell you a little bit about why I moved to Woodinville. 2014 was when I first moved to the state of Washington. I lived in Seattle. I lived in a variety of apartments and condos. And I really liked my experience in Seattle, but I was outgrowing Seattle. I was building a family. I wanted to live in a suburb. Crime was elevating, and so I started looking around, and admittedly, I didn't know anything about Woodinville, I didn't know anything about Bothell, these other cities, right? But I did as any homeowner would. Prospective homeowner, started doing my research. What I found was D.R. Horton had a tract home that was the exact same house in Bothell and in Woodinville. I didn't know what to make of it. I did know the taxes were higher on the Woodinville house because it was King County, and I did know that the Woodinville house was $10,000 higher. So I emailed my realtor. I'm like, hey, what do I make of this? Do I go Bothell? Do I go Woodinville? He sends me back one line, go Woodinville. It's a brand name. I go, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. So I pay the extra $10,000. I buy the Woodinville home. What I found was a quiet suburban neighborhood with a rural charm, very close to major cities, very close to Seattle, very close to Bellevue. It was heaven to me. I love living here. But then I went on a trip during the pandemic to Palm Springs to go to an art gallery. And I didn't think anybody there would know about Woodinville. And so I'm like, yeah, I'm from Woodinville. You guys wouldn't know about it. And they just dropped what they were doing. They're like, you're from the Napa of Washington. You live there. You actually have a house in that city. I go, yeah. They're like, Jeff, that is a nationally known city. That is a brand name. And I'm like, wow, this brand thing is sticking. I worry that if we go put cameras and signs that say subject to surveillance, we're going to erode that character and put that brand at risk. Now, you may argue it's necessary to reduce crime. When I look at the statistics, I see Woodinville is a very safe city. We have half the crime for personal crimes, crimes against persons, than the rest of King County. But when you look at the property crime is indeed higher. But then you look at other metrics. You look at the sales tax per capita, and the sales tax per capita is the second highest in all of King County. What that tells me is there's a lot of business here, and a lot of business and a lot of tourism is indeed bringing on some property crime. It's a statistical mirage. What we're seeing is a crime stat that looks artificially high because we have a very low population, but a very high number of businesses. Next, there's a potential for abuse. King County SOP has a lot of mitigations for how we're going to mitigate abuse, make sure that we're doing this safely. That is very hard for residents to audit. It's actually very hard for the council to audit. You're relying on the representations of that vendor, and you're relying on the fact that their hardware and their software is as safe as they say. One anecdote before my time runs up here, I'm actually an investor in a security camera company. That company is about the same size as Flock. They have 0 information security staff. I have personally found 2 data breaches on that company. Thank you.
Next up, Alex Campbell.
Good evening. I'm Alex Campbell. I live in the city of Limits. I'm going to speak also on automated license plate readers. Tried to prepare some data that I've been finding quite easily as I search around the internet. This is just a few examples of what I found that are the Pandora's box, I would say, we're about to open up if you go forward with this. And I put them roughly in chronological order. 2008, we all remember that wonderful time, so long ago. During that presidential campaign, the Virginia State Police recorded all license plates going to, coming from multiple political rallies, one for then candidate Barack Obama and the other for vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin. That data stayed in their system for 3 years, despite their system being configured to delete data 24 hours later. It was found and only deleted after a lawsuit forced them to. No one ever explained how that remained there for that so long. Also, technology errors do make dire circumstances. In 2009, San Francisco police pulled over Denise Green, an African-American city worker, handcuffed her at gunpoint, forced her to her knees, searched both she and the vehicle, all because the car had been erroneously flagged as stolen by the license plate reader. Also, we have another issue. Guilt by proximity will be a real problem. In 2012, a SWAT team in Kansas raided a man's house where he was with his wife, 7-year-old daughter, 13-year-old son. The problem? He had attended a local garden store, and they proceeded to hold him at gunpoint for 2 hours while they tore his house apart, searching for the marijuana grow operation they were sure he must have built. These issues are all over the place, and the reports of them are continuing to come in. They continued to come in at that time, to the point that there were enough lawsuits in California, the state auditor stepped in and did a full 7-month investigation of every police force. Their comment? The agencies we reviewed either did not have ALPR policies or their policies were deficient and they had not implemented the sufficient safeguards. For example, none had audited searches of the ALPR images by their staff, thus had no assurance that the searches were appropriate. And there's a real risk there because in 2022, in Ketchie, I think that's how you say it, Kansas, a police lieutenant was convicted of stalking his ex-wife using flock ALPR. He not only could search where she was in the city, he could use Flock's data sharing technology to follow her across multiple municipalities. So in conclusion, Woodinville doesn't need this. It's a terrible example to set, and we should stop this whole thing right away. Thank you.
Anybody else would like to speak? Okay, let's move on to the first business item. Business item number 6, approval of community court interlocal agreement. Mr. Hill?
Point of order, we haven't to approve the consent calendar.
Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped over that when I turned the page. Sorry about that. Consent calendar, a motion?
I move to accept the consent calendar as written.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Again, business item number 6, approval of community court interlocal agreement. Mr. Hill.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council members. As you know, the City of Woodinville has been working with the Kirkland Municipal Court for the last several months in the hopes of presenting Council with an opportunity to join their community court program. In March, Judge Olson came and spoke to you about the program and helped answer specific questions. Community courts has large support from participating jurisdictions, Judge Olson, and Woodinville Police. The next few slides will be a repeat from the March meeting when they were presented by the judge, but are a helpful refresher on the program. So what is community court? Community court is an alternative to incarceration, and it works to address quality of life challenges that court participants may be facing. And it offers a compassionate and accountable approach to the judicial system, and it includes building stronger and safer neighborhoods and reducing recidivism. One thing just want to really make sure I'm highlighting is the types of crimes that community courts is able to address, and these are nonviolent misdemeanor crimes. There's some great examples here on what that might include, ranging from things like theft, or other items such as possession of drug paraphernalia. So eligibility criteria for the Kirkland Community Court. So community court participants must not have any violent felony charges in the last 5 years and any pending violent felony charges or sex offender history. Traffic offenses are also not eligible for community court. A couple of the key principles they like to emphasize on the program are how it adheres to accountability to the community and court through work such as service projects, weekly check-ins, and incentives and sanctions. It's an individualized approach that emphasizes on compassion and shifts from jail and fines to services. It really focuses on community involvement and has opportunities for service projects and volunteers, as well as general public court visitors and impact panels. There's collaboration with local stakeholders and stability and progress, and they're aiming for stability and progress, not perfection. So what does this mean for Woodinville? We were offered a pilot program of 9 months that will become permanent if neither party wishes to terminate the program or terminate the agreement. Price increases from public defender and prosecutor will take place. We're estimating that to be approximately $35,000 per year total between the two. Nonviolent offenders in Woodinville would have an opportunity for an alternative to incarceration, similar to what we're seeing across the rest of the Kirkland Court participants. With that, I will have a recommended motion on the screen, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And we have Chief Myers here as well to answer anything else.
Councilmember Evans.
Thank you. So I know that the program's still new in Kirkland, and they had some stats, but it's still early days. Do you know if we're going to get some stats if we end up joining, and if they'll be reporting back to us in any sort of timely fashion?
Yeah, so through our public defender and our prosecutor, we'll have regular numbers on the number of participants who are participating in the program. So that will be some raw data there as well. And then through the police department, we'll be able to know which crimes are going to be eligible for the community court program, and we can provide regular check-ins that way as well. But I'm happy to report back if council approves to move forward with this in whatever time it would make sense on how things are going and how many participants we've had.
Great. Not to put you on the spot, Chief, but do you have any idea over the last year roughly how many people would have been eligible for this program? No exact numbers needed, just guesstimates.
Yeah, I think that our ballpark was, we were expecting a ballpark of like 3 to 6 referrals per month.
Okay.
Wouldn't be surprised if it's more some months. Wouldn't be surprised if it's double that, but like that's kind of the ballpark. We're not talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, but it's probably, a few each month. As we get going, and it may be more on the front end as we have people that we don't have to wait for new offenses to make referrals. So once we start the program, if we have identified people over the last few months that would benefit from this, and it's appropriate for them wherever they are in their court process to make referrals on them, we can divert them from where they are.
And how do you and your staff your officers feel about this program?
We are broadly supportive of it. We think that, our experience is we end up dealing with repeat offenders. And I know my officers are not frustrated by the interaction, but frustrated that that's the reality of the system. We work in criminal justice because we think that it works in some ways when it's working right. And I think that's an indication that there's something here that's not quite working right. And so we recognize that it's worth trying something else. And community court it's new to us, but it's not a new idea. Right. And has shown that I really do think when you have prosecutors and defense and police kind of all rooting for the same thing, which is for this person to successfully get through this program so that it reduces their criminal justice liability, so that it meets the needs that they have and hopefully prevents another offense. That's powerful when you can get everybody pulling in that same direction.
Yeah, I agree. When we had the presentation, I thought it was really, really valuable. So thank you.
Councilmember Best-Campbell.
Piggybacking on the data, are we going to get data that's specific to Woodinville, or is it going to be aggregated for the entire community court? And if we could see together and separate, just to see how we're doing relative to the rest of the court, if we're doing better, which of course we are because we're Woodinville, we're obviously better. It would be interesting to see our trend versus their trend as well as the court itself. And then the other question was, so this $35,000 a year, is that irregardless of the number of people we put through that program? That's just a flat fee and it won't increase?
So the $35,000 fee, we're about, that's an estimate. So we have on, and I might get this mixed up, but on the public defender side, we have a flat rate that they're going to be charging us for this program to be added to our contract that will be coming back to council at your next meeting later this month, should this pass tonight. And then on the prosecutor side, it's a per meeting fee. So when we do have someone in the program, that would be charged there. But the $35,000 figure was a best guess estimate on the figures that you just heard from the chief.
So how frequently will we hear if we're either exceeding this $35,000 or grossly under it? Are we going to have maybe a halfway through the term check-in? So we're not, one year we say we have $35,000, the next year we have to budget for $100,000. Mid-biennium, it's hard to come up with that money. So is there a checkpoint along the way for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll definitely at the end of the 9-month pilot, we'll do a full review on making sure that was a correct estimate. And then as we continue to get those invoices in from the public defender and the prosecutor, we'll make sure we're coming in at our estimate there. So I would say it'll probably be even more so of a monthly check once we get or a monthly review once we get invoices on the number of people coming through. And as far as the data question, sorry, I forgot to answer that. Yes, happy to definitely share data and do a check-in on how many from Woodinville specifically. And I'm happy to ask the court to see what they can provide from other cities. Off the top of my head, I don't know if they're able to share that or not.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Chief, I had a question. So as you're going to be on the hot seat tonight a little bit, but as a subject matter expert on this, anecdotally, I hear that the jail cells are crowded, and anecdotally, again, I hear that sometimes prosecutors aren't possibly pursuing cases as vigorously as they might have because of that crowding. So is this an alternative to that? And then would that free up space in the jail cells for some of these lower offenses for somebody that maybe have more serious offenses? Is that accurate, or is that just something I hear in urban legend?
I think that narrative probably isn't accurate for Woodinville in our experience. We have a prosecutor that is very supportive of cases that we bring and helps develop cases, and we have good communication with that office. I often because we have officers that have worked in other parts of the sheriff's office that then transition to Woodinville, many of them come with experiences from other parts of the county dealing with other prosecuting agents, and are kind of like surprised when they get here and see a case that wouldn't fly somewhere else because of overcrowding, because of workload issues, and that just get triaged out, that our prosecutor really does review everything that we put in front of them. When they say no to something, it's because we didn't meet, probable cause. It's not because we have too many cases or the jails are overcrowded. We have different options for jailing here. Kirkland being our preferred location. There's some challenges in this system too. It is not because of overcrowding generally. It's because that's a small jail that can't house every type of person, and then we have to look to other locations. And because we're aware of these issues and we're kind of working with Kirkland to make sure that we're using that our agreement with Kirkland is functioning as it was intended. We're watching every time that someone is declined. We're tracking all of the reasons for that, and I cannot think of a time that someone has been declined because of space issues. So that may be something that they're feeling somewhere else. I think this program stands up on its own merits, even if you had all of the jail beds. It would be lovely if they were all empty. And so that's just not really an issue that we've got here.
Thank you. Jared, a question for you. That 35,000, you mentioned 9-month pilot program. I missed, is that just rotating 9-month, or do we eventually go to a 1-year thing, and when does that stop and start?
Yeah, so, well, ideally, we were hoping to present you with joining the program fully at this point, but Kirkland offered us a 9-month pilot, so they can kind of get a sense of the number of people who will be coming through the program. So we're going to have 9 months, and ideally, at the end of that time, if neither party terminates the agreement, then it would roll into a full-time agreement with them. So the 35,000 is for a yearly estimate, not a 9-month estimate.
So 9 months would be a little less than $4,000 a month, roughly. So when you stretch it out to over a year, is it going to maintain that slightly under, or we're estimating it's going to remain slightly under $4,000 a month? Is that what we're thinking?
Correct. And I will add with that too, if you recall, a couple months ago, we had some cost savings become available in our jail services by reopening our jail contract with Yakima. So if we have folks who are going to be housed longer in jail, there's opportunity to have those individuals be in Yakima instead, and that did open up some cost savings as well.
Okay, thank you. I think it's a great program. I appreciate that.
Great.
Councilmember Evans.
Just one more question about the budget. So is this 35,000 on top of everything that we spend for prosecuting, or would it replace any of that?
This would be an additional charge just for the community courts.
Okay, great. But is there any offset for if we had to house somebody long-term? Because we would have to pay for that, like in Yakima or...
That's a good point. Yeah, there could be cost savings that would be presented by having people who would otherwise be, in jail at that point. I don't have an analysis on what that number would look like, but at the end of this pilot, I think that would be an interesting thing to look at, is how many people we would have been paying to have their housing that was saved through this program.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions for Jared or the chief? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
Sure. I move that the city council authorize the city manager to execute an agreement with the Kirkland Municipal Court to join the community court program.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you like to start us off, Deputy Mayor?
I certainly would. I am all for this move to make a more compassionate and humanized way of crime and punishment. It avoids those two words by recognizing that everyone is a person that is entering that system and tries to segue them to a different path. And I actually love the thought and thinking behind it. And there's a lot to say in it in terms of the art of the gathering and how this changes people's lives and affects a different outcome, reduces recidivism, and will put us on the right path through that here.
Councilmember Edwards.
I think this is a great investment in our community. It gives people the opportunity who want to make a positive change in their life, that opportunity. Often people who commit these lower level crimes or misdemeanors have other things going on in their lives, whether it's homelessness, drug addictions. This type of program allows people to get the resources they need to make those positive changes and really have a positive impact in our community. And if you want to go to the financial side, the recidivism part actually has a huge impact. The amount we would have to pay where if people did come back and they did get arrested for something else and we had to prosecute that, those would be way more than $33,000 potentially. Obviously, we can't quantify that yet, but there is potential cost savings here as well. But for me, it comes down to giving people the opportunity to make that positive change in their life in our community.
Councilmember Evans.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. Giving people the opportunity for restorative justice, giving them access to services that they potentially could not access. I know last year when we took a look at the Health and Human Services grant requests, they far exceeded what we could do because there's so much need out there. And so having this program that already has this built in and has direct access to services that could literally change people's lives and reduce the rebounding and coming back into our legal system. I just think it's a really great investment in our community long-term.
Councilmember Arndt.
I'm going to echo all of those things and say that I work closely with someone who is a navigator in the Shoreline Community Court system. And one of the things that I hear often is how well this system treats people like people, and rather than cogs or problems. And I think the fact that the Community Resource Center is built into the solution in this not only helps that individual who has committed a crime to address their underlying needs, but it actually has a big impact on their family systems as well. They often have children, spouses, parents who are suffering from some of the same things, and this helps all of those family members get the help they need in ways that they obviously weren't being reached before.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, let's have actually, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Business item number 7, discussion of license plate reader program. Chief Myers.
Thank you, Council. Today, we're going to be talking about the license plate reader program. Thank you for allowing me to come and share this with you. This is a summary and discussion. As you know, this was put on the CIP list and can be, funding can be addressed through that, and at a later time, I can give you kind of a broad outline of what that would look like. The purpose of this is to kind of summarize again what was in the staff reports. I know there's a lot of information, and to share a little bit of how it works, why we might use it, and what some of the best practices are. So that's, I didn't put any visual aids in the staff report, which I realize I should have, but that's an example of what an ALPR looks like. I drove past one recently in another city, and the camera's maybe a little smaller, like between a water bottle size and a cell phone, and has that one, the one I saw had a small solar cell on it like that as well. So talking about why ALPR. I say that this is a tool that's responsive to Woodinville issues. Several years ago, when I became the chief out here, I brought this up as something that seemed to address the type of crime that we have a lot of in Woodinville. And that's when I learned that there was a history with video systems and license plate readers here in Woodinville, and that the timing might not be quite right. And so that's kind of been something that we've tried to work other angles to address, and I think it's worth having a discussion about now. This isn't something that we brought up because of a sales call. This is something that I've been talking with staff about for a while. I say it's what police do, but better. A routine investigative step for police is gathering video to identify vehicles. We have so much retail crime here, and as we've shared, retail crime is really the driver of our crime stats, which are down, but still it's the bulk. And so when we look at the work that we can do to make a dent in safety issues and in crime in Woodinville, it's domestic violence and retail theft, right? You've heard me say that before. This is a tool that works really well when it comes to identifying vehicles involved in the many different types of retail crime, property crime, burglaries, robberies, car thefts that we tend to have down here in this, like in the downtown core. We know that vehicles are used in a high percentage of crimes, and so it's really sort of bread and butter work on a follow-up case here for an officer to be trying to track down video from Ring cameras or neighboring businesses or cell phone footage or ATMs or drive-throughs that would capture something that would allow us to identify the vehicle that was used that someone else witnessed. This tool makes that piece faster. A little bit later, I'll kind of walk through what it looks like to do a typical investigation and what all the ways that we track down information that really have nothing to do with ALPR and will remain the same, and then the piece that ALPR would speed up. Like I say, without an ALPR, what we do is we still get video. We just get it from sort of community-based video. And what you get with that is like a long chunk of actual video. So like let's say the Bank of America, that's a common place that we end up getting video because crimes happen at Ulta or TJ Maxx or something in that complex. And we end up going and getting video from Bank of America, and then we have 30 minutes of video that we just have to watch all the way through to find the vehicle that was involved, and then we're zooming in to see if we can find any identifiers on it. That's the work that we do. What you'll see is that the way that ALPR works is instead of having to review 30 minutes of data, 29 minutes and 45 seconds of which are not who you're looking for and are not related, you can really like zoom in narrowly on the specific vehicle descriptions that you're looking for. And that saves so much time. Another piece of this, the idea is that ultimately the idea is to drive clearance rates up and time down. Clearance rates meaning like we're solving more crime. That is my hope. I don't anticipate, there may be an effect. Some cities may say that license plate readers, deter crime, or I'm not sure that that's true. And if it is true, it has to, you have to go to signs like Mr. Lyons was talking about, which I don't think that's the way that Woodinville should use these. The use case for Woodinville is we already have a whole bunch of crimes that are hard to solve because they're property crimes. And so they sit there unresolved. And I want to solve more of those. And that's the idea behind this. Just since I started working on the staff report and this presentation, when I was driving around off duty, I witnessed 2 hit and runs in Woodinville where, the offending car hits another one. And then before I could even pull out my cell phone, I was stopped, pull out my cell phone to take a video or see if I could see the license plate, which I couldn't because my eyes are so bad. The offending car took off and was out of town. One was over here underneath the trestle, and the other was over by Target. And so they're gone in just moments. And in both of those, I thought, with an ALPR, we could solve that because I could say that this was that was a Honda Accord. If that Honda Accord drove through an intersection with that, we'd be able to find that license plate. That's on those hit and runs. That's one example of how we end up using that. But it would take a case that we either couldn't solve or had to go through the effort of trying to find camera footage that was community sourced somehow to being able to go and run a query and come back with that license plate number. This is something that we've discussed in our retail theft meetings. This task force of the police departments and retailers in the city that have been getting together every quarter. I think that has been a good effort to try and address our retail theft issues and the kind of crime that we have here. But we're just looking for more ways to do this better, and I think this keeps coming up as a suggestion. And the last reason why ALPR makes sense is because it's affordable. If you thinking back to that 2013 program to 2016, the description of that was it was 3 cameras put up in major intersections that took 24/7 video, and then it didn't have any sort of search tool. if we needed to go back and get a license plate from it, the license plate reader program was us like zooming in to see what the license plate number was. So it was not incredibly effective, and it was killed because it wasn't effective and upgrading was going to cost a lot. I think that made sense. The reality is this stuff is not the same technology. And I almost like hesitate to compare it to that or to talk about it alongside this 2013 to 2016 program because, you know, it's not video anymore, it's photographs. And it is not zooming in like that, it's highly searchable. So you can also weed out cars that you're not interested in. I think that the need that prompted that program and kind of the theory behind why you'd put that up remains the same, even though those cameras are kind of a much different idea. The cost on a pilot program for ALPRs could be done for something like $20,000 a year to get really meaningful data, and it can be smaller or larger. So let's go a little bit into how ALPR works. So this is an example of what a photo from a fixed location ALPR would look like. And that's the data that it gathers. It's the license plates, the make model, that records the time, and it would show if that same vehicle was captured on other events during the last 30 days. They're small, they can be attached to power or they can come with their own solar power. They're usually on a 20 or 30 foot pole. And in addition to the license plate or lack of license plate, vehicle make and model, it also can detect if there's things like unusual damage to a car, roof rack, camper, things like that. And that's useful because those are the types of things that people describe to us when they see a car. I couldn't see the license plate, but I saw it had a roof rack. Or couldn't see the license plate, but it should have front end damage because that's where it, was involved in the collision. So those are filterable, so then you can get even more narrow to not have to go through unrelated vehicles. The systems delete vehicle records after 30 days. And comparing this to other data that we use, or other videos that we use, it's less data captured than our old video system that was video instead of photographs. It's less data than our body-worn cameras that our officers wear into people's homes and businesses. It's less data than a retailer store security that's taking video, highway toll cameras, and certainly cell phones that we get our hands on for investigative purposes. So what it is license plate recognition that gathers evidence and facts about vehicles, not people. As you can see, it's positioned in ways that it's not capturing people data at all. Alerts of wanted vehicles used to solve crime and according to state laws. It's not facial recognition. It's not tied to any personal identifiable information. These are not used for any sort of traffic enforcement. And the data is not stored beyond 30 days. It is connected to the National Crime Information Center, what we call the NCIC database, and to NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The benefit of being connected to those two is that's where we get some of these alerts from. And so it's alerts for amber alerts, silver alerts, missing people, stolen vehicles, or vehicles that are wanted in connection with violent crime. And it's vehicles for all of those things. So there's another database that we use to find out, like, for example, if someone has a warrant or a court order against them. That is a Washington state system, and so it is not at all what this data is connected to. So we can't tell if a vehicle coming through, if the registered owner has a warrant. That's not an alert, or has a court order, or if their driving status was bad. In fact, this doesn't give any sort of registered owner information. It only alerts to those things that are in the NCIC or the NCMEC system. Yes, or criminal history. I would say that's another one that is outside of NCMEC. Okay, so talking a little bit about what.
Chief, you have a question. Councilmember Arndt.
Thank you. So this system is capturing the still photos with the license plate numbers, but that system itself does not access any of the license information that would be connected to the personally identifiable information.
Right.
So if you see some vehicle of interest come through the system, you would then physically have to look that up in a separate system.
Yes, that's exactly right. I heard a police officer from another city telling a story about how there was some concern in that city that there was someone that got pulled over by police, and the police officer made a comment about how the person wasn't from here, and that they found that troubling. And were worried that it was the ALPR in that city that the officers were using as a way to like vet whether people were coming here that shouldn't be here. And that officer couldn't do that with an ALPR system that's configured in the way that I'm talking about. What that officer could do is see the license plate on the ALPR and then run it through we call it a CAD system. It's the computer in the car, right, that we all use it's the same system that sends us to dispatch calls for service, that we can run names and plates through, that has full access to all of the law enforcement approved systems. So they would have to take the deliberate step of actually typing that in themselves. There's not like a hyperlink that you can click on to do it in the system. They have to, separately go and do that to get that information. They could have also done that had they just, driven behind the car or seen it drive by. Running license plates like that is a common practice for police officers. So we're accessing that kind of information all the time. But it is not through an ALPR, because ALPR isn't configured that way.
And what sort of records would be generated if you get a hit off the ALPR system and then you run the plates? Are you then generating records that are tying that two sets of data together? Or only in the case of a certain, particular crime if you follow through on it?
So I guess there's a couple different ways that it could be. So this, an ALPR data would be saved for 30 days and then overwritten. Any inquiry that an officer runs on names or plates, anything like that, that's saved in our CAD system and is PDRable until whatever the retention standards are on that, if there are any. It's probably like 5 or 10 years. Like that stuff stays in there forever. There's not an automatic link between the two, unless you're right, unless we identify that there is some sort of crime. So one of the ways that an ALPR is configured, that's sort of a best practice that I'll get to later from our IT manager, is that you should be able to pull that data out of the ALPR and put it into the police records management system when it's involved in a case that we're looking at. Because then, at that point, we don't want it to be overwritten after 30 days because it's evidence in a crime. So in that case, it would get pulled out, and then there would be a record in our records management system that would show this data, came from an ALPR, and we learned this about it, and it's part of this crime. So there's kind of a couple different ways.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Edwards.
Yeah, I have two quick questions here. The first one is, you talked about how this gathers information that's not tied to people, but about the vehicles. And the next bullet says, alerts police of wanted vehicles. What would trigger something to be a wanted vehicle as defined there?
Those would be generally input by police departments where they have like a warrant for the arrest of someone on a violent crime, and they have a vehicle that is likely to be used and involved in that, and there's actual reason for search and seizure of that vehicle as well. They're pretty rare, and they're usually for robberies or homicides or drive-by shootings, things like that.
Thank you. The reason I'm asking that is because even if you're not getting information about the people, if it alerts a vehicle, then you have to look up the people, then it kind of is getting information on the people.
Yeah,
But
and in cases like that, like, that's kind of the point, right? We don't just want to stop the vehicle, we actually want to stop the, the person who's suspected of the drive-by shooting in that case, or whatever.
Yes.
But it's a separate search then at that point. To go
yeah, thank you.
look
That's why I wanted to clarify what level would trigger that standard there.
Yeah.
My second question is, I think you hit a little bit earlier, but I'd love a clearer answer of what is disclosable by PDR in terms of this type of data? Like, what would be available at that point?
Sure. I looked at, so the PDR-able data, the audit trail of any, okay. So in order for a police officer to access ALPR, any searches, they have to log in with specific user identification, and then it logs, every keystroke that they're doing when it comes to the query. That gets saved forever and doesn't overwrite after 30 days. So you could still go and see, years later what, Detective Smith, which actual license numbers they were searching for, or what the vehicle profile they were searching for. Then also, it's the 30-day data is PDR-able within the 30 days if you can request it timely enough to do it. The King County Sheriff's Office is handling the PDRs on this, so it's not a heavy lift for the city of Woodinville on this. And I think then probably the training that we receive and things like that would also be publicly disclosable.
Councilmember Taylor.
Yeah, I want to go back to, this is connected to the NCIS, right?
NCIC?
Okay. And then you said it's removed after 30 days, but the record that goes to the NIC doesn't get removed, right?
So NCIC, think about it this way,
NCIC.
is the national sort of the national information sharing on certain qualifying public safety issues. So stolen vehicles and sort of the violent wanted persons that we talked about. So that, like, regardless, we may not even be the ones inputting that information, right? It could be a stolen vehicle from Seattle or California. It may be a wanted person from another area. But those types of things get put in NCIC because the community wants an awareness that we can identify these, that if a stolen vehicle leaves California, we want it to be a national system so that once they cross state lines, we can still recognize that it's a stolen vehicle in another area. And same with some of these wanted bulletins.
So I'm confused. All the data that's coming off, everything is going to NICS?
No.
Only those that are identified in NICS?
Nothing, we don't push anything, nothing from ALPR gets pushed to NCIC.
Or NCIC.
In the data, thank you for this. This is a good clarification. The ALPR gets alerted to if one of the plates that matches NCIC, then we will get an alert. NCIC doesn't gather information. It's simply just an automatic sort of push notification that.
But really the sensors in Woodinville become remote sensors for that national database. If one of their cars goes through, you don't know if it is or isn't, but it's flagging. So
yeah, I guess that's a way to look at it.
So it becomes a remote sensor, so everyone is connected to that database. So that data is somehow flagging. Every car that's going through is being flushed into a file check, right?
And if that's a way to look at it, sure. Yeah, that's a way to look at it.
So it seems like there's a lot of data that's, as a sensor, it's picking up a lot, sending it, and they don't do anything with it if they don't need to. It's, all right. How do you assure that the camera does not capture faces? I see it's not facial recognition, so how do we know that it's not collecting any personal identifiable type of information other than the license plate and the car, the vehicle?
I mean, I think that we have to talk to a vendor when it comes to that. I know that they are positioned in ways that it is aimed at the backs of cars. If someone has their face in the back of a car, it would capture a photo of the face in the back of the car. If someone was walking in the street, like to the wrong against traffic,
right?
Actually, I don't even know if that would trigger it because it's not a video, so it's only really being triggered by vehicle profiles.
So you have two cars going through an intersection, one going one direction, the other the other. You take a picture here, you're capturing something on the other side. If they're involved in an accident, you're picking up something. Yeah.
Sure. And I think that we'd have to talk to a vendor. Like, they tell me, right, that they aim them this way, that it is not like personally identifiable information, which I believe that there's no facial recognition. We have a ban against using facial recognition in the King County Sheriff's Office. Like, we're not interested in it. If they are completely lying to all law enforcement that's buying this product and they're actually running facial recognition in the background, we can ask them. But like, I don't know how to give you that answer.
All right. How do you use it to tag or track a stolen vehicle? So the red Tesla goes through there. How do you know it's somebody reports a stolen vehicle? Do you go in after the fact and look at it for the red vehicle, or do you have it flagging, hey, I know that this is stolen? How do you get the alert that it just went through the intersection?
There would be the type of, so if something had been already reported and it was in that NCIC database and it goes through the intersection, then we get to configure what type of alert we want. And so that could be something like a push notification into the work computers of the people that are working that day, could be to their cell phones, it could be only to the detectives that are working. Those are all configurable.
Okay, so my neighbor had his vehicle stolen from Hagen's parking lot. Well, he knows what the vehicle is. He's got the license number. You captured the fact that it went out a intersection. How does that help you?
In that case, it might lead us to be able to find the direction of travel. Like I say, this isn't the only video that we're looking for.
Okay.
And so if you see where it's going, maybe you can find another location that picks up video that actually captures the driver. It's not an ALPR, but depending on where we put those cameras, they can tell a story about which direction they're going. It also can tell us if there's other cities that they're headed to. We'll get to it here, but there's sort of a network effect to some of these where you benefit from other cities having these as well. When you recognize that, then it's no longer in our city. Now that stolen vehicle is in this city, and
Okay.
We can alert those cities that, hey, this vehicle is likely in your jurisdiction. Attempt to find it. It also works for our officers that if they know that there's a stolen vehicle that's sort of maybe inbound or like driving into the city, then we will look for it and hope and ideally find it before it ends up being used in a crime. And so our officers are eager to use it that way too.
And here's another question. We had a council member.
Councilmember Taylor, you're over 6 minutes.
Well,
There's other people. You
So-
have another chance.
last question.
Councilmember
You
Taylor,
have ALPR. Have you
Councilmember
looked at it
Taylor,
on your
you're over
vehicle?
6 minutes. Deputy Mayor.
Let me finish the question.
You have another chance. You have 2 turns. You're well over 5 minutes. Other people get a
Okay.
turn. That's our
Quick-
rules.
quick
Not my rule,
question.
our rules.
I think it's pertinent to
You
everyone.
have a second turn.
You can have ALPR on a vehicle, right?
Councilmember Best-Campbell, you have the floor.
So talk to me a little bit about where the vendor fits in this whole policy. So these cameras are not owned by the city. We're leasing these cameras from the vendor. The vendor owns the proprietary information about how it's gathered, where it's stored. Once it leaves site of Woodinville, what control do we have over that data?
So the data is typically, it goes, so again, I think this is going to be where, like, talking with some of the vendors will be helpful. I know that some of the vendors I've talked to say that they store data on a, like, it would be a uniquely Woodinville data set. So it's not able to be, used by any other cities without our permission. Any requests that they have for it, we have to authorize. It's also not shared with non-law enforcement. It's on the AWS government cloud with end-to-end encryption. They told me a bunch of other things about the SOC compliance levels that mean nothing to me, except that the things that they say track, I'll show this here, track with, we did get recommendations from our city IT manager about for systems like this and our systems like a speed camera, what are those data things that we need to be concerned about? So we are having these conversations. Unfortunately, I'm not the best representative on these issues. Many of you know way more about this than me. And so I think this is going to be where we have to engage both with our city IT and vendors to talk about what the specifics are.
Okay, and I wanted to point out too, so the 3 cities that are in our staff report, Tukwila, Yakima, and Arlington, all use the same vendor. So that's Flock Safety. There's been extensive ink spilled regarding some of their less than savory data privacy, particularly their desire to sell information. So if you're a homeowners association, for example, you can have your homeowners association cameras given to the police. The police can then get access to this information. Now we have a larger data aggregated set. When information leaves our city, when it leaves our intersections, when that picture is taken, we don't have control over who sees that data. We have to rely on the security of that vendor. And I have yet to see any teeth in any law that states and cities pass that say, you can't sell this data. You can't do anything else with this data. Once the data is gone, it's gone. Whether it's end-to-end encryption, that just means between us and the vendor, it's safe. But once it goes to the vendor, who knows what they do with it? And it seems to me what this program is doing is treating everyone like a suspect. And I know that that's not your intent. I'm certainly not suggesting on a personal level that is anything that this department wants. I am saying taking a step back and looking at a program that surveils everyone and gives you time, location, identifying information of your vehicle. There's a famous study from Nature, the journal Nature in 2013. If you have 4 geospatial data points with 95% accuracy, you can say where this person lives. It is a great disservice to the public that if you go through 4 intersections in the city of Woodinville and you can count directions, you can say where each and every person going through an intersection lives. And having access to that type of information on a database, even if we have end-to-end encryption, even if we say we're following all of these protocols, these vendors still sell this data. And so the sale of that data is a greater risk to the people of Woodinville than someone stealing perfume and mascara from Ulta. And I haven't seen any information from Flock or any of these other data companies. I've spent decades actually researching this. This is one of the things that I spend my time on. I have not seen any information that says they're not going to sell it or what our recourse is. So I'd like to know how we ask these questions of these other jurisdictions that use this product and how they're getting around these problems. We are not the only people who have ever heard of someone aggregating and selling data. But I do think that we need to dig in and find that out. So if we can get more information on that, great. But what I'm seeing here is not really knowing where that data flow goes. We know what we want to do with it, and we can trust our own little city, but as soon as it comes out of the city, I really don't know how we can trust anybody, any vendor. $20,000 for cameras, it seems like that's really a low cost for what we're getting. And there's an old saying, if you're not paying, then you're the product. I fear that's the case here.
So the language that I know that has been used in contracts with vendors is that footage owned by the agency or city will never be sold or shared by vendor. I think that's the language that I would expect to be built into a contract. And then if they don't follow that, we break the contract. I mean, I think, is that the type of recourse that you're thinking of?
Well, we break the contract, but they've already sold our data. How is it that then, so for example, if the vendor sells some of this aggregated information, and you can, with 95% accuracy, say where each and every person who's driven in Woodinville lives, breaking the contract doesn't save all the people in Woodinville whose daily habits of, I know what day you go to the grocery store, I know when you go to the bank, and I know when you're not at home. When that information is out there, breaking a contract seems cold comfort. So I don't know what sort of legal recourse we have other than breaking the contract.
I mean, think about it this way. We have our records management system that the King County Sheriff's Office uses is a third-party vendor. And like, it has 100% accuracy on where everybody lives because in our criminal investigations, we document that. And it has extremely personal information. And it has, victim statements, and it has crime scene photography. And like, all of that is in third-party systems that are hosted in much the same way. This data doesn't have that level of accuracy. And so I think that my view, I think your concern is right. I just see that this is really the way that we use data. Like, we don't create our own records management systems anymore. We don't create our own digital storage systems anymore. We don't do that. We use companies that build this stuff better than we do. The King County Sheriff's Office had Microsoft build a product for them for a records management system back in the early aughts. And that's what we were using when I came on board. And it was an absolute disaster because it was supposed to be this one-off product that they developed for us that then they were hated maintaining for us because it was problematic. We, like most other police departments, have gone to recognizing that there's people that specialize in this, and as long as they can give us assurances and we can have contracts that spell out how they use this data, that's the way that business is done. And I just don't see that this type of data set is nearly as problematic as many of the other things that we have, the other information that we have.
So one more question if you want, I can wait till the next. I'm asking a question if I would be better to wait for my next turn. So before you jump down my throat, I'm asking.
I'm not jumping
if I
down your
should
throat.
yield.
You're at 8
Thank
minutes.
You. I'm not 8 minutes.
8 minutes. Councilmember Evans.
Thank you.
Just as a reminder, I'm sorry, just a reminder, every council member gets 2 turns, 5 minutes. That's our council adopted rule. I let it go when it's kind of going, but approaching 6, 7, 8 minutes is disrespectful to the other council members who have not had a turn to speak. Councilmember Evans.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the time savings for your officers? So, for example, last year, a house in my neighborhood burned down. The investigators had to go door to door to try to see if anybody had cell phone coverage, if they had cameras. We've had numerous property crimes in our neighborhood. I know, we've been in Costco parking lot, which I know is not necessarily Woodinville, but, and we've had things there. How long does it take your officers to have to go track down things without having this sort of tool available?
Yeah, thank you. I've got an example here that I'll kind of show that walking through like some of the steps that the officers will typically do in investigating any sort of routine crimes. Identifying witnesses and information. That's what you're talking about, where the investigators are going door to door. They're asking, canvassing, right? They're looking for what did people see, descriptions of that, and then trying to go to find video evidence to illuminate what it was that they saw. After that, once we get some type of video, assuming that it's not conclusive and that has all the information in it, then we have to start a process of requesting more information. That piece usually takes days or a week, kind of a turnaround time on when we send out, this is what the vehicle looked like, even if it's highly identifiable, before we are able to close the loop and determine what the vehicle license plate was on that. And then at that point, once we have a vehicle license plate, we move to sort of all of the steps that we typically do, which is then we're going into our other databases to find out who are the people that are associated with those cars, who lives at the house where this car belongs, what are the criminal histories of the people that are associated with it. Like all of that happens regardless of how we identify that vehicle.
So you could have this system and identify it faster, or you could go do all the legwork of knocking on doors and talking to tons of people and get the information. Regardless, we're going to end up at the same place where the officers are taking that information
Right.
and using it to identify what their next steps are in investigating.
Right. This picture is an example of a request to identify bulletin that another one of our jurisdictions down in Covington put together. And so it was a robbery at an ATM where someone was shot. And witnesses in the parking lot gave vehicle descriptions. And then the detectives got these are all from video, right? So there's a couple shots there that are from an ATM. There's one that's from the bank outside of the ATM, and then there's one from some other business in the parking lot. So all of that is video that we acquire and that we will continue to get on any investigation regardless of whether we have an ALPR or not. And so then what this officer did is wrote up this bulletin with those pictures and sent it out to other agencies. This bulletin got viewed by Kent Police Department. I think it was Kent that has some ALPRs, and then they were able to run that center photo through that description, and they found that this vehicle on the right in that smaller picture, that was a photo that was taken a week before the robbery that has a license plate on it. And so this was a couple-day turnaround because the agency that was investigating didn't have these ALPRs, but another agency did. And so that was actually a little bit shorter. If the investigating agency had those ALPRs, they would know that license plate, before the end of the night. One of our sergeants recently went and was on a panel for promotion at another police department where they were assessing officers to decide whether they could, who would promote up. And one of the scored points for their assessment was if they remembered to check their ALPRs when it came to investigating a serious crime. It wasn't like a bonus point. It was like, this is a minimum requirement at this department is that you use this tool. And more I'm seeing that this tool is just becoming sort of foundational work to do what we already do, but just shorten the time on it.
Kind of like your computer.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Councilmember Edwards.
First of all, thank you for putting information about potential concerns with data release and things of that nature. My question comes from someone that raised this to me, a concern they have, and I was wondering if you could address it. Do you see any potential issues for victims of domestic violence or stalking and how this data could be potentially used to, disclose their location or things of that nature? Are there any issues related to that? And if so, are there things in place to mitigate that?
Yeah, the only thing I could think of is when the bad actor is the police officer. But I know that's real. To Mr. Campbell's point about the stalking, I agree that there's some danger there. I can think of two cases that I know of where police officers, there was a sheriff's office member. I was told this story when I first came on about a sheriff's office member that was using their in-car computer, the CAD system that they can run through the state-level database to track some significant other, right? And they ended up getting arrested for stalking in that case. I also was a part of an investigation of an officer of another department where we knew that officer, while on duty, was using their CAD system to run license plates that they saw outside of their partner's home, right? And they got arrested and fired for that. All of that still happens. I And I think that ALPR could be used that way by an officer, which is why we have an audit. An audit that requires that anytime that we are entering a search, that it has a case number, that it has a description, that we can go back and double check, right? And it's pretty easy to see, like, does that car have anything to do with that case number or not? In fact, it's part of our SOP that an auditor is performed every 90 days. Beyond that bad actor type of scenario on the police side, this data isn't easily accessible by the public. So I don't think that there's going to be a high likelihood of that. And like I say, if someone could use that, did get their hands on that data set to try and use it maliciously, there's much easier ways to maliciously stalk someone or to do that, right? Not that I'm going to give those away, but this is just, it's not an easy data set for that.
Any further discussion, questions? Councilmember Best-Campbell.
I was just going to ask, is there more of the presentation or?
I've got a few more slides.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I kind of went over these best practices. The transparency portal, I threw some examples in there. I'll say this is not a requirement. There are cities that have ALPRs that don't have anything like this, but I think this is an interesting possibility where some cities will have the vendor build them a portal that that explains what the program is, why we have it, what the data, who has access to the data, how many searches there were. One thing that I've seen from this is some of the numbers of those other cities. It's easy to just go on and see, how many times these cameras are capturing pictures of cars, how many of those NCIC alerts they have, and then how many times officers are going in and actually searching. Which to kind of get a ballpark on what I think we would use this for, some of those cities that we put up there, like Arlington, Tukwila, would have like 120 or 160 searches in a 30-day period, which sounds to me like that's the ballpark where that makes sense that these are, deliberate actions by officers. This isn't just, we're setting up alerts to be notified, all the time for every blue Honda that goes through. Especially when you compare that to all of those cities that have those types of numbers also have many thousands of NCIC alerts that go through during that same 30-day period. So it means that there's a lot of these, cars that have those types of bulletins attached to them that go through. That doesn't mean that there's going to be thousands of stolen vehicle arrests or all of those things. It means that officers are still pulling out sort of a finite number that they're doing follow-up on. I would imagine that our numbers would be lower than Arlington and Tukwila, but probably in that same ballpark. I saw Olympia has like 30-something searches. So I would imagine that sort of that 30 to 120 is probably about where we would be. And then pointing out that another best practice is just, again, to Mr. Campbell's point that you made, bad policy creates huge problems no matter what the technology is or what the practice is that you're talking about. The Sheriff's Office put together this SOP that we will continue to keep working on, that we will end up following. And there is a regional network on benefit to some of this where we can choose and we can ask to be able to run searches on our neighboring cities' ALPRs, and we can authorize that same access, basically expanding the network that we have when we're looking for a particular vehicle. I'll say that with both of there's a couple things that I wanted to just throw in here. I know I gave some examples in the staff report of like the types of use that we would use this for. And I was trying to wrap my head around a little bit of like, how often do I think we would use it? And I think it's reasonable based on our 700 crimes that we had last year in Woodinville that I would expect to see several hundred times that we could use this technology in a year, because of how many of our crimes are property crimes where we're trying to identify an unknown suspect, and how many of those crimes have vehicles involved. Like, so much of our crime is not committed by people who live here, especially on our property crime. And so they're getting out of town somehow, and it's not on our great bus routes. And so there's vehicles involved. And so I think we will have ample opportunity to use something like this. I appreciate both of our public commenters coming and sharing as well. I think I agree with almost everything they said. I think that my view is that kind of working within the system is I see the types of data that we have our hands on, and I see that this is lower risk than many of those, and there's a real benefit to shortening some of the time on what is a pretty routine thing around here. I think that's all my comments.
Deputy Mayor Randolph.
Can you take a moment to speak to, you mentioned 700 crimes here in Woodinville. Can you give a little bit more detail about those crimes and how this technology would prevent or lead to solving those?
Yeah, so 700, that's the number we had, which I say was a little bit down from the previous year. It was 700 and something in 2022. It was 697 in 2023. 600 of those are property crimes. And I think that's going to be the bulk of the work that ALPR gets used for. There are going to be some one-off cases here and there where we have, maybe a violent person crime. We don't have a lot of that outside of domestic violence here. And in domestic violence, you know who the people are, right? So when it comes to those property crimes, we know that a high number of those involve vehicles. And a step to solving many of those crimes is we don't know who the person is because they were wearing a mask or they were unknown to us. And so in order to identify who they are, you find a license plate. And then you can move from a license plate to identifying a person. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm not answering the question you asked.
Yeah, I was thinking, give me the use case. Moreover, it's not always a car that we can identify. How do we get from the car to actually identifying this tag in public? Because it kind of almost dovetails with what Councilmember Taylor was saying. We got a car, we get a tag. How do we actually find that tag?
Yeah. So then that's all outside of ALPR, right? So like when we have a tag, then we have access to DOL records. We have access to ownership of cars. We have access to so we can see where it's registered. We can see who the owners were. We can see who lives at the location where the car is owned. We can look in police records from our jurisdiction and other jurisdictions to see if that vehicle has been used in is logged in any police records anywhere else. And then we can look to see who the people are that were associated with those.
Yeah, that starts out with the case, though, we have the tag. So I'm getting back to the AVR. When do we use these? Because if we know that a crime has occurred,
yeah,
we're able to see and collect that tag. We have all this PII that's already available based on that tag number. I just checked while sitting up here. I can go to cars.com and look up a tag number,
right,
and get the color, or a little bit of leading ownership information.
Yeah.
So what are we doing with this device?
We often have crimes with vague vehicle descriptions that we get from witnesses, and we don't have a license plate. And so that's what this gets us from, is a vague vehicle description to a license plate. So examples of ways that we have those is Ring doorbell footage is great for identifying vehicles. It is terrible for giving us actual license plates. And so when we have mail thefts and burglaries in the neighborhoods, when there's different things that happen in those areas, we get those, and then oftentimes we're just kind of stuck with, well, I can tell it's a white Tesla, but that's about as far as this case is going to go. This search would be able to get us farther on that. We have it when there's witnesses that are like loss prevention employees at stores who are either don't feel comfortable following someone into a parking lot to get a license plate, or they're where their actual policy is to not follow that far. And so they can say, well, I saw they got into a gold sedan.
So these would need to be placed in specific places where they actually collect that tag from the place where the crime occurred.
So I think that the best way to use these is to just put them in public roadways that are high traffic. That's sort of the best practice on these, both because,
There's a lot of white Teslas that have been mentioned, or a lot of Teslas that have been mentioned in crimes tonight. So apparently they're
that's
a
right.
very common car.
Yeah.
How do we not get the wrong person?
Didn't mean to profile.
How do we get the right person?
Totally, and that's the data that's the work that we do right now, right? Is we go and pull the video from an ATM or from one of the businesses, and we end up looking through that also. What this search allows us to do is really narrow and start really narrow. I'm only interested in white Teslas that came through the city between 6:45 and 7 o'clock on this day, and then at that point it's small. And then what we would do is go back and kind of do some of that other work of, does this really fit? We can go and show, if we think that we're getting close, we can show it to a witness. Does this look like the car that you saw, before we dig in further?
I have to mention my concern with data and data aggregation with a third party as well. And my question, if we have specific business entities that have a supreme interest in this, have we spoken with them about possibly upgrading their cameras to include AVR? Because it's not impossible technology. You can do this with a small video camera.
Yeah, some of them are interested, but most of these are large corporations that are not that far yet, right? We have great relationships with the boots on the ground that work in Woodinville, and they are not generally the decision makers for some of these companies. We do have a business that's just outside the city limits that is putting in LPRs and has offered us access to their LPRs. We have a business in Woodinville that has LPRs that we've used their data, that we can go ask for it when we need it. So we are seeing this, and we are using it. It's just not ours. We're end up community sourcing it.
Councilmember Taylor.
Okay, back to the question. Your vehicles have the capability of scanning license plates?
Ours don't.
No?
No. I know the city of Seattle is doing that and putting those in place, and other cities have them.
Yeah, old technology.
Yeah, we don't. I don't know if or when the sheriff's office will consider that, but that's not what we are proposing at this point, and our vehicles don't have that.
Another item is many stores and businesses have these little portable cameras set up out in the parking lot. Can you tie into those? And would that be a benefit, say, where you have high retail?
We can't tie into those. I don't know if that would be a benefit. No? I think that the idea of trying to, I think a couple of you have talked about predicting crime, trying to deter crime. And I don't think that's what this should be used for. And the idea of like moving one around feels a little bit like you're trying to.
Well, they have them in a parking lot, and I've seen businesses with those in the parking lot where employees' cars get broken into. They've got surveillance.
Yeah, and I think that's fine, but I don't know. Maybe this is me thinking that it's worth having a distinction between those efforts to deter crime and something that gathers data. I think that that gathers it in this way. Like, I don't know. There's something that feels like those should be separate to me, but I hadn't thought about that until now. So that's just my off the top of my head thoughts.
And what agencies in the community are possible sensors that you could tie into?
So I know Newcastle, eventually Seattle, Black Diamond, Covington, Tukwila, SeaTac, Clyde Hill, Medina. And then I know that there's several other cities that are thinking about it, but I haven't actually seen it put on paper yet.
Linwood, Bothell.
Oh, I know Bothel's
because
thought about it, but
we're right on the edge. How are we tied in with Snohomish County?
I know Bothell has thought about it. I don't know where they're at on that thinking. And my awareness, it may be easier to start networking once we have a vendor up and going. I don't know, up to the north. I know.
Okay, so the stolen white Tesla that's going through town, you get a capture, you get a license plate, you know what direction. But at that point, nobody in the vicinity is going to be able to capture it unless they have eyeballs watching and looking. So should we have more cameras on cars and officers out in the high crime areas just as deterrent and collecting data?
Well, I think that we don't have the luxury of having as many officers out there. Our minimums generally are 2 officers working at a time. That's not enough to deter, obviously that's not enough to deter the high property crime that we have. Because of that, I think that the better use for Woodinville would be fixed locations and not, our 2 officers that are driving around and spending time parked in parking lots and things like that.
Okay.
I want to thank you for advocating for Woodinville. I am concerned in our role here of the property crime. I think you guys are doing a great job with the resources you have. I'm not landing on either side of this, but you use that 7-Eleven robbery. I think that originated from Redmond.
Right.
If you had that alert that happened in Redmond on whatever car description you got from the license plate, how would you have responded if this system were in place and it pinged that particular car coming from Redmond down Woodinville, Redmond Road towards us? How would that have made more efficiency? How would we see more efficiency and deter, not deter, but catch more crime, particularly retail crime, at say Target, which is a big spot? Can you go through that a little bit more in detail on how that would work?
Sure. That crime's a funny one to use as an example because we had a great outcome on it, but it was a great outcome. Like it was a lot of luck and a lot of sort of good guessing on the parts of the officers. If you don't remember, it was a robbery that was reported to us from Redmond, where a car had committed an armed robbery there and then fled northbound, and they were alerting other agencies so that we would know this was coming. It was in the middle of the night. And one of our officers just thought, like, I'll bet they're going to 7-Eleven, and went parked basically at taco time. And ended up being right, and we caught them. What would have happened in that scenario is we could have been alerted. In that case, we had a license plate number. But we could have taken a license plate number or a general description of the vehicle. Like, if it's the middle of the night and it's a blue Kia Forte, there's probably not going to be that many of those going through town. You could put up an alert on a specific type of vehicle like that and set it so that we want to be alerted if this comes through Woodinville for the next 3 hours only, and sort of set up an alert like that. And then if those officers are not sitting in front of the right store or they're dealing with something else, they could be alerted that that vehicle matching that description or that plate just came through at this particular location. And maybe that informs them that, well, certainly they would know it's in town at that point. The first step that they would end up doing is calling for more resources. Now, it's not all of the sheriff's office waiting to see where this vehicle pops up. Now we know this armed robbery suspect vehicle is in Woodinville, and so that's where we're going to ask for resources to come. It may also tell what part of the city, they may be targeting. If we've got a couple different ways, and if we think they're going to target something, it would be a different story if it's coming in up off of the Woodinville-Duval Road than if it's coming through town down here. So it just gives a better opportunity to alert and bring resources in. In the Woodinville example, there were 2 officers that were there that sort of guessed right, and so they were able to capture 2 of the suspects immediately. But there were 4 suspects, and so then 1 was caught across the street by the 3rd officer that got there a few minutes later, and then the 4th one was caught quite a bit of time later after Guardian 1 and K-9s were all deployed. So if they knew that the car was coming, it also shortens the time for those additional resources to be there to capture them. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilmember Best-Campbell.
Since we're a city that makes a lot of money on tourism, we see 750,000 people come in and out every year. What does that do in terms of data retention? So we're going to be getting, and forgive the analogy here, but a lot of bycatch. So you're looking through scanned information and scanned license plates to find someone who's in the vicinity of the target, let's say, in the middle of Saturday afternoon, which is a really busy time here. What are we doing to prevent people from being swept up in this operation and being questioned just for having the bad luck of being in proximity to a crime?
Yeah, I think that's something that we deal with all the time. You're right, like this data, this tool captures so much data that you can't use it in a dragnet fashion like that because you get overwhelmed. Like, in order for this tool to be useful, you have to use narrow search terms. And I think that is sort of kind of one of the built-in protections on this is that, if you're not the car that we're looking for, like, we get to weed you out and never even look at that picture. It's not like we have to watch you driving through because we're watching the video anymore. We don't even see it. And then our sort of that piece of not like scooping people up improperly is what we do all the time anyways, of making sure that verifying that the vehicle that we have or the partial information that we have, can we authenticate that is correct? People often don't get the descriptions correct when they tell us that it was the mayor's white Tesla or whatever they say. They may be wrong. And so we may want to find if we can get a second opinion on that, right? Like we deal with that because we're dealing with humans now anyways. And so I think much of that work remains the same once we sort of finely tune what our search criteria is on these.
And in terms of what you anticipate you're going to get out of this program, stab in the dark. Do you think you're going to see a 10% increase in arrests around property crime? Do you have a goal in mind? Do you have an expectation based on information you've heard?
Oh, that's such a good question. I don't know if you know this, but like I love the investigative piece of policing. I was never the best like proactive police officer. I didn't write the most tickets. I just wasn't, I was a little slower than all my peers in some ways, but like I loved being able to like problem solve some of these cases, especially when there's a challenge. And so I am really proud of the work that our detectives do and our officers that have been trained on these detective skills and are doing the same thing now too. I think that's a really important way that the Woodinville Police Department needs to look because of the type of crime that we have. Like we don't stop the most stolen vehicles, and that's okay with me. Like, but we need to be solving the crimes that get reported to us, right? When I say stolen vehicles, I mean like we're not out there like chasing down cars that are coming through town that look suspicious. Like that's how some of the police departments are built, and they're great. That's not the issues that we have here. We have crimes that need to be solved, and like I love trying to be able to provide training and tools for my officers to do that. I think that a really great goal would be to come up with what a percentage increase on the crimes that we solve. That is not the most reported stat. When police are reporting out to city councils, we're often talking about the crimes committed. I'm really proud of the crimes solved, and so my real hope is that that changes because of a tool like this. I would I would guarantee that there's going to be cases over the course of a year that could not be solved otherwise if you have a tool like this.
And just one more kind of statement on that, I guess, is it's important to identify what we think we're going to solve with this problem when we're we're telling the public, you will 100% be photographed every time you drive through this city. And we're giving a trade-off that we could potentially have a 10% increase in solving these crimes, but your personal freedoms will be violated 100%. What you thought was a drive through Woodinville where nobody knows that you're driving to get ice cream at 10 o'clock at night, we now know. And I think it's a really important thing to say. We've taken and weighed these two things against each other. And this infrastructure for tyranny, Edward Snowden coined this back in 2013, it is an infrastructure for tyranny. That is not to say that the people who are presenting to us tonight are party to it, but it is an infrastructure that can be used in ways that we don't anticipate. And looking at the rainbows and unicorns aspect of it, I think does a disservice to our citizens if we don't look at what's the flip side of that coin and lifting up that rock. So I appreciate that these are questions, these are tough questions that we've asked you tonight. I understand that you are not the vendor, and it's certainly not you who's going to be slurping this data, because I know that you are technically not interested in that sort of thing. I respect that police work is what matters to you. My concerns about this are, what is this trade-off that we're providing, and how much do we think we can correlate, and what are we asking our citizens to tolerate? So if we can get more information on that, I would love to see what statistics you can find. I haven't found any correlative data with this program. Perhaps you have access to things I don't.
I've probably seen similar things to you where vendors are saying that our product is associated with an X% decrease in crime. I'm skeptical of anything that says that, like, we're responsible for a decrease in crime. So I'm not presenting data like that, nor do I think that the decrease in crime is really what we're intending for this tool to be about.
Councilmember Evans.
Thank you. So we live in an age where everywhere we go, we are on video, we are on photos, our debit cards are used. If we write checks, those are used. We go online, that's tracked. We are in an age where we are tracked. That's just, if you drive down this main street, all the banks are tracking you. They have video cameras that are looking at the street. So I think that we need to stop the fear-mongering and maybe have somebody come in and really talk about how this is used. Take us through a few cases. Help us see how this has reduced the police effort. Help us see what the community benefit is, but also address some of the concerns that are out there about how the data could be improperly used. Because from what I'm hearing, this is like the boots on the ground that you don't have right now. You don't have 100 people to go knock on doors every time a property crime happens. You have 2 people who are working at a shift. And so this would help just really increase their ability to narrow their scope of what they're focusing on. So, we've used, the same example a few times, but if you were to say a blue sedan with front end right damage going through town between, 6:45 and 7 p.m. on, July 7th, I don't think you're gonna be having some sort of dragnet of violating every single person in Woodinville's privacy. You're probably gonna get 1 or 2 people, and then you can hone in and really focus your efforts so that your police force isn't out there, going to Bank of America, going to all these other banks and saying, hey, can we get access to this? We need to see this. And then watching, reams of video where they're violating much more privacy in that. It's not that you don't have access to this information. It's just that it's not searchable. And so I think it would be really good for us to see the data privacy protocols, to see what the storage protocols are, to see, what are those audit logs looking like. I just want to take the fear-mongering down and help answer some of these questions.
So you mentioned one thing earlier that caught my attention. You said there's a process where somebody doing a search, got keystroked on what they were searching. So that's, I'm assuming that's protection so not some broad searches or random, or that if somebody is stalking somebody or whatever the case might be, that's a protection in that instance. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, that's all goes into audit logs that, like I said, don't get deleted.
So my experience, not on the police side, but I do know that I do know that crimes happen in areas where it's easier, or you're less likely to get caught, softer targets type of thing. Has there any data that shows that implementing this gets around? I know that, for example, Lululemon down in Totem Lake, just massive retail theft, and they weren't doing anything because they're primarily their policies. And so that place just got targeted, no pun intended, but targeted over and over and over and over again. Is there any data, or is there anything that shows that this makes Woodinville less attractive for retail theft? Or is that data, that isn't talked about amongst that element or what have you? So I do know that the retail theft is a problem here. I know that Target, for example, was down for, I don't know, a week because of retail theft there, which cost us a significant amount of tax dollars right before Christmas. These are real crimes that are affecting our community, and there are stores that are building in inflation, shrinkage on their product because this organized retail theft is not being caught. So I value the concerns of my more tech-savvy council members, and I think those are valid, and we should explore that. But I also think we should explore ways for deterring crime that's affecting our city in many, many ways. So we're looking for whether to kick this down to the CIP at this point. Is that where we're at? Next step, Mr. City Manager, is that where we're going with this or not? Or are you looking for us to say, let's get more information, or we're not doing it, or whatever?
There's currently a placeholder on the CIP, the draft list. As the chief mentioned, there's no action anticipated by council this evening. I think this is the kind of feedback and conversation we need to be able to bring back additional information to get the council the answers that they're looking for on some of these questions. So, and there's no action anticipated or expected or asked for from council this evening. It's we're having a conversation about it at this point.
Okay. Any last questions? Councilmember Taylor.
Yeah, I think you just hit a great point, and this is detection, and detection is after the fact and it's always expensive. What are we doing, and what can we do on the deterrent side to build in, to make our retail a little bit stronger? Have we established any store relationships or looking at opportunities to reduce the access or to implement any kind of procedure? It just seems like the deterrent side, the prevention, is always the easier way to go than detection.
We, like I say, we have been meeting quarterly with our retailers around here to both improve our process and also like educate them on what are the trends that we're seeing, what are the ways that we know of that they can decrease their sort of exposure to crime. One of our detectives has been through a bunch of training on crime prevention through environmental design and can give feedback on ways that they treat their physical environment to try and deter some things. After talking with them, some stores have increased their security presence. We don't have the staffing to do that ourselves, but some stores have recognized the need for it and have done that. And I didn't bring them, but we got stickers I know this is what you were leading to. We, on suggestion of someone who was saying that it would be great if stores that participated in sort of this like project in collaboration with the police department had some way of being recognized for that. And so we made awesome little stickers that we are going to give out, and they can put in there, kind of like the Ring doorbell things that people put in their homes, but they can put them on the front door if they choose, or they could put it in their break room so their employees see that they're collaborating with us. Like however they want to do it is fine. And I didn't bring one, but maybe over the next few months, you'll start noticing some little, in collaboration with the Woodinville Police Department, Retail Theft Task Force stickers in some of our stores. That's a very small way of doing deterrence, but that's what I got.
Yeah, I think being proactive is pretty healthy, and even with the crimes of opportunity that happen out in the parking lot, the unlocked cars, the things left out on the seat. In another area, I know I went to Best Buy, and I came back, and there was a calling card from a policeman that had kind of slipped it in, talked about the stuff that was on my car, and hide it. It was during the holidays, and I thought that was kind of a positive, and it was good engagement. I don't know.
Deputy Mayor Randolph.
Yeah, I also believe the deterrent is a good way to go, especially if you have it, hey, this is being watched. But alongside that, it sounds like we have a group of concerned commercial people who want to take action. I would encourage them to actually get engaged with creating their own piece of action with this third-party vendor to collect tags so they can tell you, hey, it was this tag leaving the spot. Because I feel like as a city, as we start to pursue this, we run into a number of different issues. And I hate to sound like a fearmonger, but just because my data is currently being collected and sold, and our data is currently being hacked and passed around on the black market and stealth nets, that doesn't mean it's right. And I would like to avoid being part of that as a council. There's a couple of different things, and my thoughts with this go directly along with my thoughts on the speed cameras. I have a considerable amount of concern for the collection of data, what happens to that data, because it leads to algorithmic bias. What that is in large part is, hey, I saw a car. Hey, I believe it's this car. Hey, this car has this person within it, and that person is able to be spied upon, profiled, and put into a different category. So they're always having a problem as things go forward, whether that be from a commercial standpoint, from things that get pointed at them, or from a legal standpoint. We all know that bias is a reality, and I'd like to avoid it on a technical level. We've already snuck into that domain, but I'd really love to try and reel that back as much as possible. And I know, once again, that sounds very alarmist, but it's already taking place to a large degree. For me to feel comfortable with this, and I know this is really above the level of this council, but localized data residency where the city would be able to audit and control access. I know that that is difficult to impossible, especially as we're talking about a third party. That's like, hey, we have our data up in the cloud and this is where we manage it and keep it. That sounds fantastic, but we all have heard of those cases where other organizations and other commercial entities have also stored their data in a specific way, and it only takes one individual who does a poor job of securing that data. Even casinos, somebody goes out and he says, hey, reset my password, and it's the wrong person, it causes a problem. Along with that localized data residency, we want any contract with a third party that disallows all data sales and aggregation. Because PII, that tag doesn't have PII on it when it starts, but I'm willing to guarantee the second step of collecting that tag is collecting the color, very reasonable, the year and model, and the vendor, and then it spills over into PII almost immediately. The question is it going to be the police that's looking at this information or Cars.com trying to make a sale or a purchase? And that's why I say it's spilling over just a little bit. It doesn't seem horrible. It's a marketing opportunity, good on them. But once again, I don't want the city to participate in that marketing opportunity that says, hey, we just saw somebody drive through. They have a 1993 XYZ. We need to sell them a car. So I would love to avoid being part of that initiation. We would also want whatever third party that we're participating in to give the city standing to take action to protect our residents from data sales and aggregation and leaks and disclosures when those things happen. Because that's the third piece that doesn't exist, that's above the city, that needs to happen on a federal level for me to actually have some level of trust. Right now, you can collect and sell data at will as long as people don't know about it. And it's regularly disclosed that, oh, there was a data leakage 5 years ago. After that point, it's far too late for people to know about it, and it's far too late for us to do anything. I would love for us to have some level of standing built into the contract as a city. It's not something that the federal government is doing. It's not something that the state is doing. But if we're going to start it here, that is fine with me, and I would love to be part of that.
You feel like you got what you wanted? That was a lot. So I appreciate the presentation. I know a lot of work went into that. Thank you. Councilmember Best-Campbell.
I just had one suggestion, not that you have enough homework. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, so they're the ones that have been aggregating this data for years. I think it would be instructive to start there and see some of the work they've been doing. There's some articles in Wired that have been discussing this again. This all came out in like 2013 when Edward Snowden sort of spilled the beans on what type of surveillance operations are out there. It's important to use that as a starting point. We could see where these things have gone awry and how we're still seeing issues popping up, but I think that's a good starting point for us to look at what the concerns really are here. It's not fear-mongering, it's fact-mongering at this point. This is all known information. To the Deputy Mayor's point, you have a right to freedom and privacy in this country, and it is a First Amendment right. And I was just in Washington, D.C. on the 4th of July, and we're 248 years strong. Let's make it to 250, God willing, and let's keep that First Amendment intact. And it is a balancing act to make sure that you have the tools that you need, but also that people have the privacy and freedoms that they need. So I'd be happy to share some of this information with you that I have offline so we don't beat the dead horse any longer here. But I think that that would be a great place to start.
Thank you. Moving on to business item number 8, the RAISE grant. City Manager Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. I've got a presentation for you on this item this evening. And there is no action anticipated or requested on this item. This is a discussion item again as well. But this is, of course, our RAISE grant that I know many of you are excited about after we shared the news that we were successful in securing that grant a couple weeks ago. So the RAISE grant, just some brief background, that is the Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity. That's the RAISE acronym. This is the latest iteration. It seems like every presidential administration gets to rename this program. We're on its 3rd iteration now. It was the Tiger originally build. Then it moved to the BUILD program. Actually, our own Senator Murray was instrumental in the creation of this program back in the day. So very helpful to have that relationship as well. Historically, through the different iterations of this program, it's been a very difficult program for anybody but the largest jurisdiction to compete in. It is and remains still a very onerous application process, and certainly will be an onerous administration process. So for large part the life of this program and its different iterations, it has been reserved for the largest jurisdictions who have staff and resources to administer these sorts of programs. There have been some intentional efforts in the last couple of cycles to try to make this more accessible to other jurisdictions, and I think we're a testament to that as well. All right, some brief history on ours. We first applied for this in the first time in the city's history, but applied for fiscal year 2023. We utilized this consultant help through one of our on-call consultants. If I remember right, it was about $30,000 we put towards that effort. We did so, we put that application together in about a month, which is atypical for these types of applications. There's usually larger jurisdictions that are working many months on these, but this was an all-hands-on-deck effort, and I commend the staff for that effort back in 2023. I know we've probably talked about it in the past, but it was literally we're spending hours a day going line by line through every word in those applications because there's strict page limits and criteria you're trying to satisfy. So it was a significant undertaking by staff and our consultant, and again, they should be commended for that. It was unsuccessful in 2023, but I think, again, somewhat atypically, was designated in its first round as a project of merit, which made it all the way to the Secretary of Transportation's desk, which is no small feat, especially for our first time applying for this. It was not successful, just simply, and we did some of the debrief with the review staff, and it was simply a matter of there's more requests than money available at this point. We turned around and made some minor modifications for the fiscal year 2024 funding round. Fortunately, it was not a start from scratch effort. And with that, as I've mentioned and notified council and the community previously, we were selected for the award of that full $5 million request. That is fantastic news. Also on the East Rail Corridor, as I've shared, King County was successful in their grant application for $25 million. So that's $30 million to our East Rail Corridor, which is a huge win for our region. And just to put this in perspective, you've got the map there on the right-hand side. Those are the awarded projects. The difference in color is just the urban versus rural designations. There's all sorts of kind of set-asides within the raised grant program. But cumulatively, pulled from their website, there was $13 billion in requests this last go-round, of which $1.8 billion was available. So you can see kind of the long odds that we were facing yet again, but we're obviously successful in this round. I had to zoom in the map a little bit there, but there's all the way up to the northern tip of Alaska, there's, I think, a project. So it spans quite an area. It was kind of interesting to see that map, actually. I'll just reiterate, and I know all of you know this is not just something we got lucky and fell into, right? This was, as I mentioned, hours and hours of dozens of staff members' time. I know, and I'll call out Jared specifically on here. He led the effort, and this last go-around had 40 letters of support from a variety of organizations, agencies, and elected officials. It's hard to read there, obviously, but that list is there on the right-hand side. And of course, I think it's undeniable that our intentional and consistent lobbying efforts, including the hiring of our federal lobbyists, the regular check-ins that we have with federal elected staff, and probably as importantly, their fantastic staff for those elected officials, is critical to how we got here. So this was on that list of letters of support. You'll see all of our federal level elected officials on there as writing letters of support and making requested phone calls and inquiries to the Department of Transportation at the right time. So those kinds of efforts, I think this is the result of that you see here. Okay, the raise grant, $5 million, and specifically what that's allowed to cover per our application is the planning, public engagement, of which I expect to be quite significant, environmental review, permitting, and design of a 1.7-mile multi-use trail and linear park. We're all familiar with our corridor in Woodinville. That $5 million is in addition to our local match, which per our application is $2.1 million, for a total $7.1 million for this project. That sounds like a lot of money, but all of you are familiar with the design costs on some of these larger projects. I think a good example would be our ongoing roundabout at 133rd and Little Bear Creek, which has significant design costs when we start talking about grade separated crossings, of which there will be numerous in this project. So 7.1 sounds like a lot for design and permitting. It will go faster than you realize. This is, and I know there's been some conversation about this is simply the latest step in a 10-year plus effort. Starting when the city acquired this corridor in 2015, we acquired that largely to secure the right-of-way needed for the trestle project that we're still working on completing. The trail concept came some years later. And then most recently, as all of you are aware, the rail banking was completed in 2023. That effort took entirely way too long, but that was the process that needed to be undertaken for that. So now we start getting hopefully to the fun stuff of planning a really cool corridor, which is we have some funding now to do that. I am not exaggerating, and I know this coming from other projects, this project scale will be massive for our community and our organization. This is not just simply a 1.7 mile corridor, it's about 27 acres. It has at least a half dozen major road crossings, probably several times that in private driveway crossings. Significant critical areas encumber the corridor, especially as you head north towards the city limits. We are already experiencing this with our 133rd roundabout that's in design. We have numerous major complex utilities in the corridor that we have to work around and with. And candidly, the sheer size offers potential for many uses. I know many of you have heard from constituents about all the uses they would love to add to that corridor, which simply magnifies the potential complexity of every step of this process, from incorporating all those different pieces to actually designing and permitting all those different pieces. So just the sheer size means it's going to be more complex. This one, I know council is at least vaguely familiar with. Some of us on the staff team have some experience with this, and we're going to get to some of the specifics here. But this federal grant, it goes without saying, comes with lots and lots and lots and lots of strings. In your packets, I included, just to give you a sense of that, the sample grant agreement from the last fiscal year, including the terms and conditions. I think there was 96 pages of that grant agreement and the terms, conditions, and exhibits. Funny enough, if you got a chance to flip through that, at least 6 pages were simply lists of all the laws you need to comply with for this grant. So the 96 pages is just really a window to the other thousands of pages that we're going to have to comply with as we go through this process. All right, continuing on that thread, this is obviously on top of the other grants that we are already managing, which at this point I would think I'm safe to say that is probably a record amount for the city at any given time, certainly. And this raise grant, for those reasons I just mentioned, the last few slides, will be the most complex by far. It will require significant resource allocation. What exactly that means from a staffing and resource perspective is still being worked through at the staff level, and will likely be reflected in the budget proposal coming to you in the next couple months. You have this in your packet. This is simply a snapshot of the current grants, at least the larger ones that the city staff is managing at this point. But I think I'm safe to say that approximately $22 million currently under management is the largest at any one time snapshot of grants we've been managing in the history of the city. That's an incredible number for a community our size. All right, next steps. This is still very much in development. Obviously, we're going to have to work at the federal government's pace. But that being said, they do have experience in this. I pulled this from one of their slideshows that they offered at the beginning of the year. But the next step will be a kickoff webinar that we have in the coming weeks with all the successful applicants. And that really starts the process of working towards that executing a grant agreement step, which is our first big piece. There's some steps we'll have to get to between now and then. Ours is on the little bit simpler side because we're not a construction project. So typically before you get to the grant agreement, you've got to show that you've completed all the environmental review, all that kind of stuff. We won't be doing that because we're not a construction project. But there still will be some steps that we need to comply with before we bring that grant agreement to the council for approval. Shortly thereafter, one of our initial steps will obviously be bringing on a consultant team. Some of you are familiar with some of the ins and outs. I don't know how many of you were around. I gave an example in your packets, kind of a reference project, if you will, albeit on a much smaller scale, was our DeYoung Park project probably 5 or 6 years ago. And so if you had a chance to go kind of look at that, it kind of a similar process, but obviously on a much bigger scale as we go through this. What I anticipate to be at least the next 2 to 3 years for this process. You can see there on the graphic I pulled from USDOT, there are some hard deadlines. I don't anticipate we'll be having problems with those, or we're some years out from those. All right, with that, certainly I can try to answer whatever questions you have. Again, as far as next steps, I'm still in the process of figuring those out myself, but should have some more information in the coming month or so on that. Again, there's no action necessary or asked for from council this evening.
Councilmember Evans.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say great work. I know so much effort went into this. Since I sit on the East Trail Regional Committee, I know just how much the staff and especially Jared did to build relationships, to get all of those letters of recommendation, and to really navigate some kind of tricky regional politics. And so, I also want to say, I think that our decision, I don't know, a year and a half ago, however long ago it was, to hire the lobbyist has really paid off for Woodinville. It is absolutely impressive how much money we've been able to bring back from federal dollars. And then I know the teams here have done a lot state and, countywide. This is really an exciting development for the business community. I also am the liaison to our Chamber of Commerce, and they are absolutely thrilled with this because they see the possibilities of increasing mobility around Woodinville in ways other than in cars. They just see a lot of possibilities. So I just want to say, great job. I know so many of you put just days and hours and months and years into this, so thank you.
Councilmember Best-Campbell.
Not to cut celebration short, but any idea when King County is going to do their little portion that connects us so we're not an island of East Rail?
Yeah, so they have built a temporary trail from Willows up to 145th. When we did our project, part of that, the 145th crossing project, part of that project obviously was to connect that temporary connection and future permanent connection of the East Rail Corridor as it goes north from 145th over to Sammamish River Trail, knowing that we didn't know when that next segment was going to get built. So I don't have an answer to your question on when they're going to build their next piece. I know we're shown on all the maps up until at least this point as future sometime. But at least we have that connection now where we have the temporary connection down to Willows, which connects to the rest of the corridor, that the different pieces are under construction, and connect over to the Sammamish River Trail, where you actually come up and hit right where we're going to start building our portion of the East Rail Corridor, heading, in my direction's right, east from the river towards downtown.
And then in terms of, how am I going to ask this? When are we going to be doing the trestle realignment? Is that going to be current with East Rail? Is it going to be one then the other? Are we going to need to explode staff size to get all this done? I'm trying to think about which enormous project, of which we have at least two here, is the first one. I know we have time constraints with Raise, but we also have time constraints with money that we're hoping to get from the state.
It's going to be interesting, a couple of years for sure. We'll have actually, and we have some of our, and this is a plug for our July 20th open house coming up. We'll have some boards and we'll be able to talk to kind of the timeline and the sequencing of these at least 3 different projects that are all happening in this one area. This would make it the 4th project. We have the 133rd roundabout that is under design. The goal is to go out to bid by the end of this year with construction next construction season, early 2025. That would be the first piece because that's the completion of the detour route for when the trestle follows in 2026. There's too many days to keep track. When that starts in 2026, we need that detour route from the 133rd and the roundabout. So that the trestle will start in 2026, and then I think it's 2028. 26 is the 134th, which is dependent on the trestle project because we're repurposing part of that trestle for the 130. So there's all those pieces connected. And then we get to throw this in too. Fortunately, this is planning and not trying to coordinate construction in the middle of 3 other major construction projects. But as I mentioned, it's going to be a significant effort anyway. So it's going to be an interesting couple of years for sure.
And then to put you on the spot, do you have a ballpark of either staff or the size of contract we're going to need to help out all of this construction and all of this work? Yeah. Do we have any idea? I mean, are we talking, we hire a contract for 10 years? Do we hire city staff and then look to downsize when we get through this hump? I mean, what are you leaning towards right now since budget season is coming?
Very much still in the thought process on that. The lion's share of that 7.1 is certainly, I think, going to be a consultant relationship, right? They're going to have to do a lot of this. But to your point, there is going to be, like when we hire a consultant for anything, there's still a significant load left on the city, right, to manage that contract and to do all the other things that, frankly, we're better at than a consultant in a lot of cases. And I think just a huge part of that is a big need that I'm still trying to wrap my head around how we're going to deal with is just managing all the different concurrent pieces, right? From all the community engagement, which I said is going to be incredible, I think, for this project. It's really the heart of what this effort is going to be, to all the, managing, making sure that we have all the T's crossed and the I's dotted for all the financial reimbursement and all those pages of laws that we're complying with. We have to make sure we're complying with all that, which a consultant can help so far with, but can't do all of it. So just try to figure out the project management piece of it. Some of you were around, at least for the tail end of the project next door. That project, I was able to manage a lot of that, of course, with all of the city staff helping, but I was able to devote a lot of that time because I had staff that was helping backfill my daily duties on a regular basis, which is not, this is going to be an even bigger project than that one. So still trying to wrap my head around exactly how we're going to tackle this. Funny you mentioned that. I think the day after Mayor Millman was in my office, and he was excited like all of us were, and said, Brandon, why aren't you more excited about this? Said, I was yesterday. Now I have to figure out how to actually deliver this, which that excitement wanes real quick when that burden falls on you. So we'll figure it out. I don't have the answers for you quite yet, but we're formulating that.
I just wanted to say, now we know what happens when the dog catches the car.
Yeah, exactly.
Deputy Mayor Randolph.
I do think this is a time of celebration, so congratulations to staff, fantastic job, and a celebratory woohoo. But not to continue beating on this question, but do we have an idea when this starts? When we'll know, like, when will we have a plan for the plan of how much staffing that we'll need? Because what I'd love to do is for you to come back to council and try and give us an outlay of that to see if there's any way that the city can either expand staff or discuss contractual needs.
Yeah. I said, I think there's a lot of pieces moving around now. I'm going to try to obviously have some of that thought through and kind of packaged up for budget discussions when that comes. And so I know I'm on a shot clock on that one, right? I think there's going to have to be, I said a lion's share that I think is going to be on the consultant side of it, but we're going to have to figure out what managing this whole project means on the internal side. And that's really the more critical piece right now, right? Saying that we're going to do a contract for X amount of that percentage of that is pretty easy and straightforward. But it's, again, figuring out, like, with all these grants that we do, it's for that, most of that list that you see and all the grants that we've done in the past, it's an add-on to everything else that staff is doing, right? Accounting picks up this little piece of it, executive department picks up this little piece of it, public works does their stuff. That only can go so far, especially when I have a list of 15 plus grants. Some of those are easier than others, right? Some of them we have a lot of experience with, like the TIB at the state level. We have fantastic partners there. Those are pretty straightforward, easy grants. That's not the case for this one. So I've got to figure out, this is not going to be a case of, let's just tack a little bit more onto the other duties as assigned list for all of our staff. So I've got to figure that piece out. What's the date for the kickoff? I think you mentioned that, but didn't say. We have the first step from USDOT is a webinar, kind of a real high-level kickoff, and that's in the coming weeks. I've got to get that on my calendar still. And then from there, we start working towards the grant agreement. And even answering some of the questions there, I believe this will, like all of our federal dollars thus far, get funneled down through WashDOT to us. That sometimes is a little bit of a time challenge. So we're going to try to work through that. But we're still kind of working through all of that right now. Again, this is new for us and still very fresh. So we're still, unfortunately, without a lot of these answers on specifics. But still worth celebrating in the time being until we figure out more things that we have to do. So Thank you again, staff, and thank you, Jared, for your work on this.
Can we go back to the slide that listed all the grants? So that's about 2 years, roughly, of work that we put forward to, not all of it, but most of it, to staff. And staff has done an amazing work with what we've tasked them with. I mean, this is unprecedented in Woodinville history. This is just 2 years of work that went into this. This is enormous. This is enormous to Woodinville. That's almost $22 million. To almost all of that is priority and or most of its infrastructure projects that a lot of it we have to do or is hugely beneficial to Woodinville. So kudos to the staff. I know many of you who worked on it, but I'm sure there's other people I don't know that were behind the scenes, and please pass appreciation on this. And also council having the vision of reaching out in an unprecedented Woodinville way to our regional partners, our county, state, neighbors, federal partners, and even here locally. So I've already had people reach out to me with Pollinator Pathways, Woodinville Arts Alliance, the Woodinville Rotary, the Woodinville Garden Club. Everybody's excited about this and wants to contribute, and we're getting a lot more done by working with people and reaching out for Woodinville. And this is going to be an amazing project, but there is a lot of work that goes along with it now. So again, everybody who worked on this, good job, congratulations, and council for having the vision and staff for making it happen. You know, these relationships took a long time to build, and we built some good relationships that we are capitalizing on. So congratulations. I'm really excited about what this can mean for our community. So thanks again. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none. Thank you. Any more public comments? Nope. Okay. Port City Manager. Did we just get one?
No, you're going too fast for me. Okay, I'm going to show you these. So my item, and I know several of you probably will talk about this, but obviously we start our Celebrate Woodville concerts tomorrow evening. And what has become a tradition, we're going to be there with boards and bells on and ready to talk to the public about some of the projects that are going on in our community. Alana has done a great job kind of putting together, along with Public Works, obviously, putting together some topics for each one of these upcoming concerts, the next 4 Wednesdays. The first one tomorrow night, and this is not the final version, but what I wanted to share with council this evening, so they're not surprised by it tomorrow night. We have, the topic tomorrow night is some very initial concept renderings for the stage and boat launch project, for which we received a $250,000 grant from King County Parks Levy, and then added our own budgeted funds for this. These are very early concepts. I've got 2 here just to share with you because they're cool, pretty pictures. For what we're going to be sharing with the community tomorrow night at our booth, we'll have a graffiti board out there, just people giving their thoughts and responses to kind of these different concepts. So this is the first one, kind of the stage, the boat launch. This doesn't really show, neither one of them really does a great job showing the boat launch behind the stages. This is kind of just showing the stage pieces of it. But this is one of the concepts that we're going to be looking at. This one, I think the designers have called Sails, S-A-I-L-S, kind of ship sails. The second one is what they've termed lily pads. This is kind of a more in the round approach to it. Again, very, very initial concepts, but we're going to be sharing these with the public tomorrow, just asking for feedback and reactions to these different concepts and what they like, don't like. We'll bring all that back and start coalescing into some more refined designs in the future. But anyways, wanted to share those with council this evening. I think that's all I have for, so I'll probably see most of you, or a good number of you out there tomorrow night. Stop by and say hi.
All right, reports to council members. Councilmember Evans.
Well, I was going to say, I hope to see everybody at Celebrate Woodinville tomorrow. And we have East Trail next Thursday, the East Trail Committee next Thursday. If anybody wants to join in, you can register to listen in. It is a public meeting, and I know we have a number of people in our community who are highly interested. like the pollinator pathways, like the Rotary, bike clubs, all sorts of different clubs. And so I just encourage people to tune in. It's virtual, so you can just sign up for a Zoom link and tune in. And there is time at the end for public comment and or questions. And there have been some really interesting ones that have come up. So just want to invite the community.
Councilmember Edwards.
No report, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Randolph.
This evening, I did notice that we got email also from the 1st Legislative District Democrats actually putting forth a motion to kind of recognize the city council and the city staff for the work that we do. And I just wanted to bring everybody's attention to that and make sure it was part of the record.
Councilmember Best-Campbell.
I got a complaint actually about the Goodwill truck that's been in the park and ride forever and ever and ever is no longer there. But people must think it's invisible because they're still leaving bags of stuff there. So Goodwill didn't do a great job telling people where the new location is. Now it looks like a trash heap, even though it's fully donatable clothing equipment, because the new Goodwill drop-off, for people who don't know, is down behind the gas station right across from the ball fields. What is it that we can do about that to prevent it? And probably the same thing that we do for people who litter, which is pick it up and hope they don't do it again.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to coordinate with Metro, who runs the park and ride piece of it. But yes, we are aware of the results of the Pavlov's dog situation going on over there. So, yeah.
Councilmember Arndt.
Thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge a video put together by some of the city staff that's highlighting Wood Trails Park, and it's been making the rounds on social media. And it's just a really nice way of reminding people who may have forgotten or informing people who don't know about Wood Trails and where they can access it and what amenities are there and what is coming in the future. Thank you.
Councilmember Taylor.
I think most of us all survived with 10 fingers and went through the 4th of July. Maybe something to think about. I saw a lot of fireworks still going on in the region. Maybe consider a fireworks show next year for the city. You know, maybe add that to a Celebrate Woodinville type of event. That's it.
I just wanted to highlight, I've been working with a local church to identify another resource for a cooling shelter. They're having contractor issues and getting their permits, so it's a little slow behind what we're having, experiencing heat, but we're moving in the right direction. And just to reiterate kind of what we talked about earlier, and I didn't really do a good job of it, but you know, partners that have been mentioned, like Woodinville Rotary, they've talked about wanting to build or contribute to pickleball courts. They have a design that they've showed me about this train station looking thing that could serve as a information booth, snack shop type of thing is their kind of idea. Pollinator Pathways has reached out about some of their ideas that will go stretch the 1.7 miles to create a pollinator pathway north to south or south to north, or whichever. I guess they go south, so north to south. And the Woodinville Arts Alliance is interested, and we've set aside, and people don't know that, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. City Manager, I think it was 70 feet of track or something to do some rail-themed art. And Woodinville Arts Alliance has talked about like rail-themed arches that could go into the trail to pay tribute to our rail history. Woodinville Garden Club has talked about some of the similar things. So there's lots of people excited, lots of people are willing to contribute, and we can get a lot more done working with our partners. So I look forward to that process because that's going to be a lot of fun. So thank you.
Motion to adjourn?